please like our video and subscribe to RotoWire. Then go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.
Hey, DFS fans, we haven't forgotten about you. AJ and I, Paul Bruno, the Statsman, are back with your daily fantasy sports picks with our thoughts ahead of tonight's limited schedule of games. AJ, I normally handle the Fanduel side and you deal with the Draftkings portion. Why don't we switch it up a little bit and have you start with the Draftkings picks that you made ahead of tonight's 6-game slate?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I've maybe switched things up a little bit tonight to give our listeners, viewers, an alternative option. So I've tried to maybe key in on some players that aren't going to face as high of ownership because their teams aren't favored tonight. And I think because of that, if it pulls off, it's going to be towards the top in your GPP contest. So I start with the Buffalo Sabres. Again, the Devils are minus 143 tonight and favorites, but I think the Sabres can be a team that competes and really challenges New Jersey. I think it's a good spot to pick Buffalo as the underdog. And so from that standpoint, I'm going to use Jack Eichel as my center, 7,500. He's not cheap. His numbers haven't been great lately, but I think all that combines to maybe see his ownership dip a little bit. And I'm going to run him out with the whole first line there. Victor Olofsson comes in at 5,900, and then Sam Reinhart at 4,700. And I think, like I said, this is a good opportunity to utilize them tonight. The other team that is underdogs, maybe not quite as heavily, is the Chicago Blackhawks. Columbus favored minus 132 in that game. So I'm gonna pair Patrick Kane. I'll pay up for him. He always produces. It doesn't matter who he's going up against. I'll pair him up with Pius Sutter, his centerman there. Not going for the whole line stack, but I am going to use Kevin Lincoln in tonight. 7,300. He won't break the bank. Obviously, this is assuming he starts. We don't have a confirmation of that yet. But I think, again, it's a good opportunity to pick an underdog that'll potentially have a little less ownership. Plus, the over-under in that game is about as low as you see an over-under at 5.5. So even if he does give up a couple of goals here, it hopefully won't be a shelling, at least, from that competition. Looking at the rest of my lineup here, my two defenders, I'm going to go with a couple of guys who are very hit or miss. But when they have produced lately, it's been in big ways. I've talked about Dante Fabro in the past. He's still just 4,300. It seems that he doesn't produce on Tuesdays because every time I use him, he doesn't seem to do anything. And then the next night he'll have, like a multi-point game. But I'm going to stick with the strategy. I think more often than not, it's going to work. Nashville is playing Detroit tonight, so a good opportunity there for them to get some wins. And then the other guy I'm going to use is Mike Matheson, who has seen some really good numbers lately for the Penguins, 1 goal and 2 assists in his last 4 games, starting to produce offensively for them. And I think that's just a matter of getting comfortable with the system. He's a very fast skater. So there's some intangibles there that I like. And, of course, I always got to fit at least one Penguin in my lineup when they're playing. But I am actually going to go with 2, Paul. We talked about Kasperi Kapanen doing a little bit of a disappearing act earlier in the show. He's just 3,800, and he's still set to play first line with Sidney Crosby. And I think that's just too good of an assignment to pass up for a guy coming in at less than 4,000. So if I ran through that quickly, I'll post this lineup on Twitter as soon as we're done at AJ Scholes. Paul is, as he mentioned, you can follow him at Statsman22, and I'll get him to share his FanDuel lineup for you. Why don't you run through that, Paul?
All right, my friend. I'm going to a lineup that I might best be used in tournament play today. It's a bit of a mixed bag, and I'm staying away from the dynamic duo at Edmonton, even though they're on the slate. So I will start with the guy that I talked about when I was looking at the Washington situation, Nick Backstrom, $6,400. I think he's going to help Ovi get off the mat against your team tonight. I think that's a very low price tag for a guy who's playing very well and averaging 16 points in FanDuel play. And I'll pair him with Jack Roslovic, who's really found a home in Columbus. I can't believe the price tag here, AJ. Only $5,000 for a guy who is listed as their number 1 guy, and he's playing with Patrick Laine. And I'm putting that dynamic duo together to work tonight against Chicago. I know Chicago's played very sound hockey for a couple of weeks now, almost 3 or 4 weeks, in fact. But I think they're up against a physically more dominant club in Columbus. They're going to use that to lean on the Hawks a little bit tonight and maybe intimidate them a little bit and get more space for the likes of Laine and Roslovic to put together a pretty nice night offensively. Then I look at the Montreal-Ottawa toss-up, and I put a forward from each team in the mix here. I've got Tyler Toffoli going for the Canadiens at $6,600, one of those two guys that's been a key force to change the look of this team really offensively with the physicality that he brings to the table. And I add Cam Atkinson and Brady Tkachuk, two other guys who fit that mold as well to round out my forward complement. AJ Atkinson's another guy. It's basically a Columbus stack that I'm looking at here offensively. Brady Tkachuk, obviously a factor when your team game planning for Ottawa. He's starting to get his game in order and emerging as a young leader here to this team's fortunes. On defense, I always look for value here, and I see Damon Severson's clicking along at $4,600. I pick a guy who's kind of a linchpin on the power play here, which looks like it should improve in the near term with the addition of their new captain in the fold, as we highlighted him on the main broadcast earlier. And the Seth Jones, so I talked about his numbers at length too, having a very nice season for Columbus and being by default the leader on that power play as well going forward. $5,100 his price tag. In the nets, I had to go for a goalie that would be cheap and in a good matchup. And whenever Detroit's on the schedule, I look at the opposing net and I think, who's playing there? And tonight it's UC Saros, who's been the workhorse in Nashville, a team that I think has its own offensive challenges. I'm looking at a low-scoring game here, and I'll pick the Nashville goalie to come out on top at that $7,000 price tag. So that's the way we see it tonight. We hope we've given you some food for thought, but there's a 6-game slate that offers a lot of tasty alternatives, and I can't wait to dig into it later on to catch the action. I'm sure you're going to be focused on the Pittsburgh-Washington game, AJ.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel a little bit bad for our listeners. You know, you went with Washington, Columbus, and New Jersey as several of your teams. I went Pittsburgh, Chicago, and Buffalo. So we're on the opposite side of all three of those matchups in terms of our picks here. But it'll be interesting. I guess maybe our listeners should put one lineup. You know, use both lineups, and then you'll win one way or another. Because I don't think both of us are coming out with a winning lineup tonight. And just considering we're on the opposite sides of most of those matchups.
Could be a mini dollar bet here, maybe a 50-cent bet then that goes forward, AJ. We want to wish our listeners good luck with your picks. Join us again next Tuesday for the following episode of Puckcast with Statsman and AJ. So long, folks.
Please like our video and subscribe to RotoWire. Then go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.